Part 1: The Past Returns. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled Emily's apartment as she stood by the window, watching the bustling city below. The soft hum of traffic and the distant chatter of people walking on the streets gave her a sense of comfort. She had always loved the city, its energy, its diversity, the way it never truly slept. For Emily, the city was a reflection of who she was, focused, driven, and always moving forward. It had taken her years to build the life she now lived. A successful career as a marketing executive in one of the top firms in the city, a circle of friends who supported her, and the freedom to live life on her own terms. Relationships had never been a priority, not since the last one, Ryan. Ryan had been a ghost from her past, a fleeting memory of a summer that felt like a different lifetime. He had come into her life like a storm, sweeping her off her feet with his charm, his intensity, and his ability to make her feel things she hadn't felt before. But the summer had ended, and so had their brief romance. It was the kind of relationship that had burned bright and fast, leaving Emily both exhilarated and devastated when it was over. That was years ago. Emily had moved on. Or at least, she thought she had. She sipped her coffee and glanced at her phone. It buzzed with the usual notifications, work emails, social media updates, and texts from friends. But one message caught her eye, making her heart skip a beat. Ryan. The name flashed on the screen like a beacon, drawing her in. She stared at the message, her mind racing. How could he be reaching out after all this time? Why now? With a deep breath, Emily opened the message. It was simple, almost too casual for the weight it carried. Hey, Emily. It's been a while. I'm in town for a few days. I'd love to catch up. Let me know if you're free. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read the words over and over again. Ryan was here, in the city. After all these years, he had come back into her life with a few taps on his phone. But why? And did she even want to see him again? Emily placed her coffee cup down on the counter, her mind swirling with memories of their time together. She could still picture the beach, the way the sun had set behind the horizon, casting a warm glow on the water as they sat side by side. Ryan had looked at her then with a gaze so intense, it had made her feel like she was the only person in the world. But that was a long time ago. She was different now. Stronger, wiser, more guarded. The woman who had fallen for Ryan so easily no longer existed. And yet, a part of her was curious. What had brought him back? What did he want? Without giving herself too much time to overthink, Emily typed a quick response. Hey, Ryan. It has been a while. I'm free tomorrow evening if you want to meet up. She hit send before she could change her mind, her fingers trembling slightly. The second the message was delivered, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. What was she doing? Was she really about to reopen a chapter she had closed years ago? But there was no turning back now. Ryan had always had that effect on her. He made her act on impulse, made her heart rule her head. She just hoped she wouldn't regret it. The next evening, Emily found herself standing outside a cozy cafe on a quiet street in the heart of the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the buildings and giving the air a warm, nostalgic feel. She had chosen this spot because it was familiar, comfortable, a place where she felt in control. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her purse as she waited, glancing around nervously. She hadn't seen Ryan in years, and the thought of facing him again after so long made her stomach twist with nerves. But there was also a part of her that was excited to see what kind of man he had become, excited to see if the spark between them still existed. She had barely finished the thought when she saw him. Ryan was walking down the street toward her, looking every bit as handsome as she remembered. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his strong jawline framed by a hint of stubble. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made him stand out in the crowd. As he got closer, their eyes met, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. The connection was still there, undeniable and electric. "Emily," he said with a smile that sent a jolt through her. "It's so good to see you." She smiled back, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "It's good to see you too, Ryan." For a moment, they stood there, taking each other in, the years of separation hanging between them like a fragile thread. Then, Ryan gestured toward the cafe. "Shall we?" They found a quiet table in the corner, away from the few other patrons. As they sat down, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a deep sense of curiosity. She hadn't realized how much she had missed him until he was sitting across from her. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've thought about you a lot over the years," he said, his voice low and sincere. Emily raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Oh yeah. What brought that on?" He chuckled softly, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Life, I guess. We had something special, and I've always wondered what would have happened if things had gone differently." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She had often wondered the same thing, though she had buried those thoughts deep down, convincing herself that it didn't matter anymore. "Well, we were young," she said, trying to sound casual. "Things happen. People move on." "Yeah, but not everyone moves on completely, do they?" Ryan's gaze was intense, and Emily felt her pulse quicken under his scrutiny. She looked away, suddenly feeling exposed. This wasn't what she had expected. She had imagined their meeting would be light, maybe even awkward, but this was different. There was something in Ryan's eyes that told her he hadn't come back just to reminisce. "What are you really doing here, Ryan?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Why now?" He sighed, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I came back because I had to see you. I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us. I know it's been a long time, but I never really got over you, Emily." His words hung in the air between them, heavy and charged with emotion. Emily stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Part of her wanted to believe him, to fall back into the whirlwind of emotions she had once felt for him. But another part of her was wary, cautious. She had been hurt before, and she wasn't sure she was ready to open herself up to that again. "Ryan, I don't know," she began, but he cut her off gently. "I know it's a lot," he said, his voice earnest. "But I'm not asking for anything right now. I just wanted to see you, to talk to you. And if you're willing, maybe we can figure out what happens next." Emily looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, and for the first time since he had walked back into her life, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was a second chance, a chance to find out if the love they had once shared could be rekindled. "Okay," she said softly, her heart racing. "Let's see where this goes." Part 2, The Spark Rekindled. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Emily. After her unexpected reunion with Ryan, she couldn't help but replay their conversation in her mind. His presence stirred something in her, something she thought had long been buried. Even though she had told herself she was content with her life, Ryan's return made her question everything she had convinced herself to believe. It wasn't just the words he had said, or the way he looked at her with that same intense gaze from their past. It was the feeling, the electric current that seemed to hum between them, the undeniable connection that had never really gone away. A part of her had been wary, wondering if meeting him again would stir up old wounds. But instead, it had ignited a spark she hadn't felt in years. Ryan had suggested they take things slow, and Emily had agreed. They began meeting more often, casually at first, grabbing coffee, taking long walks around the city, talking about their lives since they had last seen each other. Emily learned that Ryan had been traveling a lot for work, moving from city to city, never really settling down. He had built a successful career in international consulting, but his work had taken him away from the idea of home, of stability. "You always like to keep moving," Emily said one afternoon as they walked along the river, the cool breeze lifting her hair. "It's one of the things that made you so different. You never wanted to stay in one place." Ryan smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "I guess that's true. But it's also what made it hard to find something that felt real. Stable." Emily glanced at him, her heart skipping a beat. There was something in his voice, a wistfulness that hadn't been there before. "Do you still feel that way? Like you're searching for something?" He looked at her then, his gaze steady and full of meaning. "I think I've always known what I was looking for. I just wasn't ready to face it until now." His words sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She knew what he meant, and yet, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear it. There was so much history between them, so much unresolved emotion, and the idea of opening herself up to Ryan again both excited and terrified her. But there was no denying the pull she felt toward him. The more time they spent together, the more she realized how much she had missed him. Ryan was the only person who had ever made her feel truly seen, like he understood her in ways no one else ever had. And yet, a voice in the back of her mind kept warning her to be cautious. People change, circumstances change, and she wasn't sure if she could trust that Ryan was really back for good. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. She stumbled upon a picture from that summer years ago, the summer she and Ryan had spent together. In the photo, they were at the beach, her hair wild from the wind, and Ryan's arm was wrapped around her shoulders. They both looked so young, so carefree, like nothing in the world could touch them. She smiled at the memory, but there was a pang of sadness too. That version of herself felt like a stranger now. She had grown so much since then, become stronger, more independent. She wasn't sure if there was room in her life for the kind of intense love she had once shared with Ryan. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to choose between independence and love. Maybe she could have both. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was Ryan. "Hey, I'm thinking of cooking dinner tomorrow night. Want to join me?" Emily hesitated for a moment, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. But then she typed out a response before she could second-guess herself. "Sure, I'd love to." The next evening, Emily found herself standing outside Ryan's apartment. It was in a different part of the city than she had expected, quieter, more residential, with tree-lined streets and brick buildings. She took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, her heart racing in anticipation. Within moments, the door swung open, and there he was, standing in the doorway with that same familiar smile. "Hey," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." Emily walked into the apartment, her eyes taking in the space. It was simple, yet cozy, bookshelves filled with well-worn novels, a few pieces of abstract art on the walls, and the warm scent of something delicious cooking in the air. It felt like Ryan, unpretentious, but with an understated charm. "Wow," she said, looking around. "I didn't know you could cook." He chuckled as he made his way to the kitchen. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me now." Emily followed him, leaning against the counter as he checked on the food simmering on the stove. She watched him move, so comfortable in his own space, and for a moment, she felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. "It smells amazing," she said, trying to shake off the sudden rush of emotions. Ryan smiled, setting the table for two. "I hope you like it. It's been a while since I cooked for anyone." As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, just as it had in the past. They talked about everything: work, travel, the little things that made life both mundane and meaningful. But beneath the surface, there was a tension, a quiet longing that neither of them could ignore. After dinner, they moved to the couch, sipping wine as the evening stretched on. The city lights flickered outside the window, casting a soft glow across the room. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Emily nodded, her heart beating a little faster. "Of course." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Do you ever think about us? About what might have happened if things hadn't ended the way they did?" Her breath caught in her throat. She had thought about it more times than she cared to admit, but she had never expected Ryan to bring it up so openly. "I do," she said softly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "But it's hard to say what would have happened. We were so young, and we both wanted different things." Ryan nodded, his eyes searching hers. "Yeah, I know. But I can't help thinking that maybe we weren't ready then. Maybe now is different." Emily's pulse quickened as his words sank in. Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? Was this their chance to start over? "I don't know, Ryan," she whispered. "I've changed a lot since then. I'm not sure if I can go back to the way things were." He reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you to move forward with me. Whatever that looks like." Her heart ached with the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time things would be different. But the fear of getting hurt again loomed over her like a shadow. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long building my life, building myself. I'm scared of losing that." Ryan's grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly. "You won't lose yourself, Emily. You're stronger now than you've ever been. And I'm not asking you to give anything up. I just want to be a part of your life again." His words struck a chord deep within her, and for the first time in years, Emily felt herself starting to let go of the walls she had built around her heart. "I've missed you," she admitted, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. "More than I thought I ever would." Ryan's gaze softened, and he leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've missed you too. And I'm not going anywhere this time." For a moment, they sat there, the unspoken emotions between them filling the space like a warm, comforting presence. Then, before she could think too much, Emily closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if testing the waters of something new. But soon, it deepened, fueled by the years of longing and the undeniable connection that still pulsed between them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. This was only the beginning. Part 3, A New Beginning. The days after their kiss passed in a blur of anticipation and uncertainty. Emily found herself thinking about Ryan constantly, replaying their conversation, the kiss, and everything that had happened between them. For the first time in years, her heart felt light, and a sense of hope lingered in the air. But with that hope came fear. Emily had worked so hard to build her independence, her sense of self, and the life she had created on her own terms. Opening her heart to Ryan again meant risking all of that, risking her carefully constructed walls. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take that step, but every time she saw him, every time he smiled at her, the fear melted away, replaced by the warmth of their connection. Ryan, for his part, seemed determined not to rush her. He was patient, understanding, and made it clear that he was willing to take things at her pace. They continued to meet regularly, enjoying quiet dinners, walks in the park, and long conversations about everything and nothing. But one evening, as they sat on a park bench overlooking the river, Ryan finally broached the subject that had been on both of their minds since the night of their kiss. "I know I said I'd be patient," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "but I need to know where we stand, Emily. I need to know if you're ready to give us a real chance." Emily stared out at the water, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to respond. "I don't know, Ryan," she said softly, turning to face him. "I want to be ready, but I'm scared. So much has changed, and I've changed. I'm not the same person I was back then." Ryan reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding her in the moment. "I'm not asking you to be the same person. I've changed too. But I think what we have, what we could have, is worth fighting for." His words stirred something deep within her. She had spent so long running from her feelings, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was better off alone. But Ryan was different. He had always seen her for who she truly was, even when she couldn't see it herself. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we try, and it all falls apart again?" Ryan's grip on her hand tightened. "Then at least we'll know we tried." "But I don't think it will fall apart, Emily. Not this time. We've both grown, and I think we're ready for this now." Emily looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. He was offering her something real, something that went beyond the whirlwind romance they had shared all those years ago. This was different, this was a chance at something deeper, something lasting. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's try." The next few weeks were like a dream. Emily and Ryan fell into a comfortable rhythm, spending more time together, rediscovering the parts of each other they had missed. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where the past threatened to creep back in and remind Emily of the pain she had once felt. But Ryan was always there, steady and reassuring, reminding her that they were in this together. One evening, as they lay on the couch in Ryan's apartment, Emily resting her head on his chest, she found herself thinking about the future. For so long, she had avoided making plans, convinced that love wasn't something she needed or wanted. But now, with Ryan by her side, she found herself imagining what their life could look like, together. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts, his hand gently stroking her hair. Despite the pain, Emily tried to keep herself busy. She threw herself into her work, spending long hours at the office and volunteering for new projects. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, the ache of missing Ryan was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Her friends noticed the change in her, too. One evening, her best friend, Clara, invited her out for drinks, sensing that Emily needed to talk. "You've been really quiet lately," Clara said, handing her a glass of wine. "What's going on? Is everything okay with Ryan?" Emily took a sip of her wine, trying to find the right words. "Not really," she admitted, her voice heavy with sadness. "We're on a break." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "A break? What happened?" Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "The distance is getting to him. He doesn't know if we can make it work, and now I'm not sure either." Clara frowned, her expression sympathetic. "That sounds rough. But honestly, Emily, it's not surprising. Long distance is hard, and if Ryan's struggling, maybe it's better to take a step back and figure things out." "I know," Emily said, her voice small. "But it just feels like I'm losing him all over again." Clara reached out and squeezed Emily's hand. "I get it. But if it's meant to be, you'll find a way through this. And if it's not, well, then maybe you're better off knowing now, instead of dragging it out." Emily nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of letting Ryan go. She had fallen for him all over again, and the idea of losing him now, after everything they had been through, was almost unbearable. But as the days passed, and the silence from Ryan grew louder, Emily realized that she couldn't keep waiting for him to make up his mind. She had spent too much time in limbo, too much time hoping that he would come back to her. It was time to take control of her own life. And so, one evening, as she sat on her couch, staring at the empty space where Ryan had once sat beside her, Emily made a decision. She picked up her phone and sent him a text, her hands shaking as she typed the words. "I can't wait for you anymore, Ryan. If you can't decide whether you want to be with me, then I need to let you go. I deserve more than this uncertainty. I deserve someone who knows they want to be with me. Take care." She hit send before she could change her mind, and as the message disappeared from the screen, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't the ending she had hoped for, but it was an ending nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. Part 6, A Heart Torn Apart. The moment Emily hit send, she felt as though the weight of the world had shifted off her shoulders, but the relief was bittersweet. She had drawn a line, made a decision, and in doing so, had chosen herself over waiting in limbo for Ryan. Still, the sense of loss was overwhelming. Every part of her ached with the finality of it. For a few days, Emily tried to keep herself busy, immersing herself in work, meeting friends for coffee, and going for long runs to clear her head. But the truth was that everything reminded her of Ryan. The songs they used to listen to, the places they had been together, even the little things, like the smell of his cologne that still lingered on one of her sweaters, kept bringing him back into her thoughts. She tried not to look at her phone, tried not to check for a response from Ryan, but it was impossible. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped, only to sink when it wasn't him. Days passed without a word, and with each passing day, the reality of the situation became clearer. Ryan wasn't coming back. One evening, as Emily sat on her couch staring blankly at the TV, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting another work email or text from a friend. But her breath caught when she saw his name flash across the screen. "Ryan, can we talk?" Her heart raced as she read the message. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She had prepared herself for the possibility that he might not respond at all, that he might just let things fade into silence. But now, seeing his name and knowing that he wanted to talk, all the emotions she had been trying to bury came rushing back to the surface. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she thought about how to respond. What did she even want from this conversation? Closure? A second chance? She wasn't sure. But one thing was clear, she couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty. With a deep breath, Emily typed a response. "Emily, okay. When?" Ryan replied almost immediately. "Ryan, can I come by tonight?" Emily hesitated. The idea of seeing him in person, of facing all the emotions that were still raw and unresolved, scared her. But at the same time, she knew that if they were ever going to get any sort of closure, they needed to talk face to face. "Emily, okay. I'll be here." She set her phone down and let out a shaky breath. He was coming over. She had no idea what he was going to say, but she knew that whatever happened, she had to be strong. She couldn't let herself fall back into the same cycle of waiting, hoping, and hurting. A couple of hours later, Emily heard the knock at her door. Her heart leaped in her chest, and she stood up, taking a moment to steady herself before walking over to answer it. When she opened the door, there he was, Ryan, looking just as handsome and familiar as ever, but there was something different in his eyes. He looked tired, as if the weight of their separation had worn him down just as much as it had her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice filled with hesitation. "Hey," Emily replied, stepping aside to let him in. Ryan walked in, and they stood there in silence for a moment, the tension between them palpable. Emily motioned for him to sit, and they both took their seats on the couch, though there was a distance between them now that hadn't been there before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emily wasn't sure who was supposed to break the silence, but eventually, Ryan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I've been a mess. I didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't know how to handle everything." Emily nodded, though the pain of his uncertainty still lingered. "I get it, Ryan. But you should have told me. Instead of leaving me hanging like that, you should have been honest." "I know," he said, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want to admit to myself that maybe I wasn't ready for this, for the long distance and everything that comes with it. I thought I could handle it, but the more time passed, the harder it became." Emily felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had been afraid of this, that he hadn't been ready, that they had rushed into things without thinking it through. But hearing him admit it still hurt. "So what now?" she asked, her voice quiet. Ryan looked at her, his eyes filled with sadness. I don't know. I miss you, Emily. I miss us. But I don't want to drag you through this uncertainty any longer. You deserve someone who can be there for you, fully and without hesitation. And right now, I don't know if I can be that person. Emily swallowed hard, her heart aching at his words. She had hoped, deep down, that he would come back ready to fight for them, ready to make it work. But instead, he was standing in front of her, admitting that he wasn't sure if he could be the man she needed. I don't want half of you, Ryan, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I deserve more than that. And if you can't give me everything, then maybe we need to let this go. Ryan's jaw clenched, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. He didn't want to lose her, but he also wasn't ready to give her the commitment she needed. I know you deserve more, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I hate that I'm not ready to give it to you. But the last thing I want to do is hurt you more by pretending I can. Emily's heart ached as she listened to him, but there was a part of her that understood. They had both wanted to believe they could make it work, but the reality of their situation had proven too much. I don't want to keep waiting for you to decide, she said softly. I can't live in this state of uncertainty anymore. I need to move on. Ryan nodded, though the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. I don't want to hold you back, Emily. I want you to be happy, even if that means being with someone else. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she listened to him, but she blinked them away, refusing to let herself break down in front of him. Thank you for being honest, she said, her voice trembling. But I think it's time for us to say goodbye. Ryan looked like he wanted to say something else, but he nodded, understanding that there was nothing more to be said. Slowly, he stood up, and Emily followed him to the door. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking, the weight of their goodbye hanging heavy in the air. Then, without another word, Ryan leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a final gesture of affection and farewell. Take care of yourself, Emily, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You too, she whispered back, her heart breaking all over again. And then he was gone, walking out the door and leaving her standing there, alone once more. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Emily tried to move forward, to pick up the pieces of her heart and rebuild herself without Ryan. But it wasn't easy. She had fallen for him all over again, and now, for the second time in her life, she had to figure out how to let him go. Her friends rallied around her, offering support and distraction, but the ache of missing him lingered, refusing to fade. It was a strange sort of grief, mourning a relationship that had felt like it had so much potential, only to have it slip away before it could truly blossom. As the weeks passed, though, Emily slowly began to heal. She found comfort in the routine of her life, in the steady presence of her friends and her work. She started running again, not just to clear her head, but to remind herself that she was still strong, still capable of moving forward. And little by little, the pain began to subside. She realized that she was okay, even without Ryan. She was still whole, still strong, still the woman she had fought so hard to become. One afternoon, several months after her final conversation with Ryan, Emily found herself walking through the park where they had once spent so much time together. The air was crisp with the onset of autumn, and the trees were ablaze with vibrant reds and oranges. As she walked, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had loved Ryan deeply, and she had no regrets about giving him a second chance. But she also knew that she deserved more than waiting, more than uncertainty, more than half-hearted promises. She deserved someone who would fight for her, who would stand by her side no matter the distance or the challenges they faced. And as much as she had loved Ryan, she knew now that he wasn't that person. But that was okay. Because she had learned that she didn't need anyone else to complete her. She was enough, just as she was. As she walked through the park, the wind tugging at her hair, Emily smiled to herself. She was ready for whatever came next. "Of course," she murmured, looking up at him. He hesitated for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Do you think we could ever, I don't know, make this permanent?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring up the idea of a future so soon, and the question caught her off guard. "Permanent?" she repeated, her voice uncertain. Ryan nodded, his gaze steady. "Yeah. I mean, I know it's early, but I can't help thinking about what it would be like if we really made this work, if we moved in together, built a life together." Emily's mind raced. The idea of a future with Ryan had crossed her mind, but she hadn't let herself dwell on it for too long. There was still a part of her that was afraid of losing herself, afraid of what might happen if things didn't work out. But as she looked into Ryan's eyes, she realized that this was different. Ryan wasn't asking her to give up her independence or her life. He was asking her to build something new, something that included both of them. "I don't know," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I've always been so focused on my career, on my own goals. I never really thought about what it would be like to share my life with someone." Ryan smiled softly. "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Emily. I love how strong and independent you are. That's part of what drew me to you in the first place. But I also think we could have something amazing together." Emily's heart swelled at his words. He wasn't trying to change her or fit her into a mold. He was offering her the chance to build something real, something that included both her dreams and his. "Maybe," she said finally, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe we could make it work." Ryan's smile widened, and he pulled her closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "That's all I need to hear." As the weeks turned into months, Emily and Ryan's relationship deepened. They spent more nights together, more weekends exploring the city, and more time talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. The fear that had once held Emily back began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of excitement and possibility. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Emily's apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, Ryan turned to her with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice thoughtful. "I don't want to rush you, but I've been offered a job in Europe. It's a great opportunity, but it would mean moving there for at least a year." Emily's heart sank at his words. The idea of Ryan leaving, even temporarily, felt like a punch to the gut. They had just started building something together, and the thought of being apart for that long was unbearable. "Europe?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. Ryan nodded. "I haven't made a decision yet. I wanted to talk to you about it first. I know we've just started this, and I don't want to ruin anything. But this job, it's important to me." Emily stared out at the city, her mind racing. She understood how much this opportunity meant to Ryan. His career had always been important to him, just as hers was to her. But the thought of him leaving, even for a short time, filled her with a sense of dread. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally, turning to face him. Ryan hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "Honestly, I don't want to leave. I don't want to be apart from you. But this is a big opportunity, and I've always dreamed of working in Europe." Emily's heart ached at his words. She didn't want him to leave either, but she also didn't want to stand in the way of his dreams. They had always supported each other's ambitions, and she knew she couldn't ask him to give up this chance. "I don't want you to leave either," she said softly, "but I understand how important this is to you. If you want to take the job, I'll support you." Ryan's eyes softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "I don't want to lose what we've built, Emily. You're more important to me than any job." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she looked at him. She knew how much Ryan valued his career, but hearing him say that she was more important meant everything to her. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "We'll make it work, no matter what." Part 4: The Choice. The weight of Ryan's words lingered in the air between them, as if time had slowed down. Emily's mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear: their relationship was at a crossroads. The idea of Ryan leaving for Europe, even temporarily, stirred a deep sense of anxiety within her. But it also made her realize how much she had grown to care about him, how deeply she had allowed him back into her life. Ryan was watching her closely, waiting for her response, his hand still holding hers. Emily squeezed his hand gently, trying to steady her thoughts. She didn't want to be the one to hold him back, but at the same time, she didn't know if she could handle him being so far away after everything they had been through. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "If this is something you really want, Ryan, then you should go. I would never ask you to give up your dreams, not for me or anyone else." Ryan's expression softened, but there was still a shadow of uncertainty in his eyes. "It's not about giving up my dreams, Emily. It's about what we have. I don't want to jeopardize that by being away for so long. Long distance, it's hard." Emily nodded. She knew the risks all too well. Long-distance relationships were notoriously difficult, even for the strongest couples. But she also believed that if anyone could make it work, it would be them. They had already overcome so much, surely they could handle this. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice more confident now. "I know it won't be easy, but we'll figure it out. We've come this far, Ryan. I'm not ready to give up on us." Ryan let out a breath he didn't seem to realize he was holding, and a small, grateful smile spread across his face. "You really think we can do this?" "I do," she said firmly, though a part of her still feared the challenges ahead. "I think we're stronger than we give ourselves credit for." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the city lights flickered in the distance. For a moment, they just stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, as if trying to hold on to this moment before everything changed. After what felt like an eternity, Ryan pulled back slightly and looked into her eyes. "I haven't accepted the offer yet. I wanted to talk to you first. But now that I know how you feel, I think I'm going to take it." Emily's heart squeezed at the thought of him leaving, but she forced herself to smile. "I'll support you, whatever you decide." The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Ryan had officially accepted the job offer, and he was set to leave for Europe in less than a month. Emily found herself caught between excitement for him and the growing sadness that came with knowing their time together was limited. They spent every moment they could together, making the most of the time they had left. Some nights were filled with laughter and joy as they explored new parts of the city, went on spontaneous adventures, and created memories that would last a lifetime. Other nights were quieter, filled with stolen glances, lingering touches, and the unspoken understanding that things were about to change. Emily tried her best to stay positive, but the looming reality of Ryan's departure weighed heavily on her. She had never been good at goodbyes, and this one felt especially hard. One evening, just a few days before Ryan was set to leave, they sat together on Emily's balcony, sipping wine and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was warm, carrying with it the scent of summer, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But the silence between them was heavy with unsaid words. "You've been quiet," Ryan said, breaking the stillness. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Emily smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just thinking about how much I'm going to miss you." Ryan reached over, taking her hand in his. "I'm going to miss you too. More than you know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his impending departure hanging over them like a cloud. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a mistake?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan turned to face her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she admitted, her heart heavy with doubt. "What if this doesn't work? What if the distance is too much, and we drift apart?" Ryan's expression softened, and he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "I've thought about that too," he said honestly. "But I think what we have is worth fighting for. We've come this far, Emily. We can make it work." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it," Ryan said gently, tilting her chin up so she was looking into his eyes. "We'll talk every day. I'll come back to visit as often as I can. And when this job is done, I'll come back for good." Emily's heart ached at the thought of him being gone for so long, but his words gave her hope. She wanted to believe that they could weather this storm, that their love was strong enough to survive the distance. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll believe it." The day Ryan left for Europe was harder than Emily had anticipated. They had said their goodbyes at the airport, and though they had both tried to stay strong, the tears had come anyway. "I'll be back before you know it," Ryan had promised as he hugged her tightly. "This is just temporary. We'll make it through this." Emily had nodded, though her heart felt like it was breaking in two. She watched as he walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alone. The first few weeks after Ryan's departure were the hardest. The apartment felt empty without him, and Emily found herself constantly checking her phone, waiting for his messages. They talked every day, just as they had promised, but it wasn't the same. The distance was palpable, and though they did their best to stay connected, there were moments when the loneliness became overwhelming. But slowly, Emily began to adjust. She threw herself into her work, taking on new projects and staying busy to keep her mind off the ache of missing Ryan. She spent more time with friends, went to the gym, and tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. And gradually, the days got easier. Ryan, too, seemed to be adjusting to life in Europe. His job was demanding, but he always made time to talk to her, sending long texts during the day and video chatting with her late at night. He sent her pictures of the places he visited, little snippets of his life abroad, and for a while, it almost felt like they were still together, even though they were thousands of miles apart. But as the months wore on, the strain of the distance began to take its toll. Their conversations became shorter, more rushed, as Ryan's work consumed more of his time. The time difference made it harder to coordinate calls, and there were days when they didn't talk at all. Emily tried not to let it bother her, but the cracks were beginning to show. She missed him desperately, and the growing distance between them, both physical and emotional, was starting to feel insurmountable. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Emily sat on her couch, staring at her phone. It had been 3 days since she had last spoken to Ryan, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had texted him earlier in the day, but he hadn't responded, and the silence was eating away at her. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She picked up her phone and dialed his number, her heart racing as she waited for him to pick up. After what felt like an eternity, Ryan's voice came through the line, sounding distant and tired. "Hey, Emily," he said, his tone flat. "Hey," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I haven't heard from you in a few days. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay." There was a long pause on the other end, and when Ryan finally spoke, his voice was laced with tension. "Yeah, everything's fine. Work's just been really busy." Emily frowned, her chest tightening. "You sure? You sound off." Ryan sighed, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't want to have this conversation over the phone, but I don't know what else to do." Her heart dropped into her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I don't think this is working," Ryan said, his voice heavy with regret. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and I don't know if we can keep doing this." Part 5, Cracks in the Foundation. Emily's heart plummeted at Ryan's words. The weight of his statement settled in her chest like a heavy stone, each second dragging by like an eternity as she tried to process what he had just said. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ryan sighed heavily on the other end of the phone. "I don't know how else to say this, Emily. This long-distance thing, it's harder than I thought it would be. I thought we'd be able to make it work, but it feels like we're drifting apart. Every time I talk to you, I feel the distance, and I hate it." Emily's chest tightened, and she fought to keep her voice steady. "I hate it too, Ryan. But I thought we were in this together. I thought we were going to make it work." "I thought so too," Ryan said softly, his voice full of regret. "But I've been thinking a lot lately, and I don't know if it's fair to either of us to keep pretending everything is okay when it's not." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she listened to him. This was her worst fear realized. The cracks in their relationship had grown wider, and the distance was pushing them further apart, despite their best efforts. "So, what are you saying?" she asked, barely able to get the words out. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Ryan finally spoke again, his voice was low and full of pain. "I think maybe we need to take a break. I don't want to hurt you, but I don't know how else to deal with this. I can't keep doing this if it's only going to make us both miserable." Emily's heart shattered at his words, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. The idea of a break felt like the beginning of the end, a slow unraveling of everything they had built together. She had fought so hard to keep their connection alive, but now it felt like it was slipping through her fingers, no matter how tightly she tried to hold on. "A break?" she repeated, her voice shaking. "Ryan, you can't be serious. We can't just take a break. We either work through this together, or we don't. But we can't just pause our relationship." "I know it sounds bad," Ryan said, his tone pleading. "But I don't want to give up on us. I just think we need some space to figure out what we really want. This isn't how I imagined things would go, and I don't want to keep hurting you." Emily wiped away the tears that were now streaming down her face, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. "Space isn't going to fix this, Ryan. We need to talk, to figure this out together. Running away from the problem isn't going to make it better." "I'm not running away," he protested. I'm trying to be realistic. Maybe we rushed into this too quickly after all these years. Maybe we didn't think about how hard this would be." Emily's heart ached at his words. They had been so sure, so confident that they could handle the challenges of a long-distance relationship. But now, as the reality of their situation set in, it seemed like everything was unraveling. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan was quiet for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was filled with sadness. "I don't know, Emily. I just need some time to figure things out. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." Emily closed her eyes, the pain in her chest almost unbearable. She wanted to scream, to beg him not to do this, but she knew that would only push him further away. Instead, she took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. "Okay," she said finally, her voice shaky. "If you need time, I'll give you time. But I need to know one thing, Ryan. Are you still in this? Do you still want us to be together?" There was a long pause, and Emily held her breath, waiting for his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want us to work, Emily. I really do. But I don't know if we can." Those words cut deeper than anything else he had said. Emily felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. She had been clinging to the hope that they could make it through this, that their love was strong enough to survive the distance. But now, with Ryan's uncertainty hanging in the air, that hope felt fragile, like it was slipping away. "I don't know what to say," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, his voice full of regret. "I didn't want to do this over the phone, but I didn't know how else to talk to you about it." Emily wiped her tears, feeling an overwhelming sense of loss wash over her. "I wish I could say I understand, but I don't. I thought we were stronger than this." Ryan's silence was deafening. After a long pause, Emily finally said, "Take the time you need, Ryan. But I don't know how long I can wait for you to figure things out." Ryan's voice was thick with emotion. "I understand." They exchanged a few more painful words before finally saying goodbye. Emily sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at her phone, her mind reeling from the conversation. The man she had once loved so deeply had come back into her life, only to leave her again, this time with more confusion and heartache than before. She had thought they were rebuilding something real, something lasting, but now it felt like everything was slipping away. For the first time since Ryan had returned, Emily felt truly lost. The days following their conversation were some of the hardest Emily had ever experienced. She had agreed to give Ryan the space he needed, but every passing day without hearing from him felt like a fresh wound. She kept replaying their conversation in her head, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. She had always known that long distance would be hard, but she had believed that their connection was strong enough to survive it. Now, though, she wasn't so sure. Ryan's doubts had planted seeds of uncertainty in her mind, and she found herself questioning everything. Had they rushed into things? Had they been too naive to think they could make it work?